Imagine waking up on a Sunday morning to the sound of gunfire. Not outside, not down the street, inside your house, where your children are sleeping, where you thought you were safe, where the man who was supposed to protect your family is the very one pulling the trigger. Now imagine you are 12 years old, and you make a decision in the dark, a decision that will haunt you for the rest of your life, but it will also save it. This is not a story about a monster who came from nowhere. This is a story about a man that people waved at. A man who sat on his porch the night before and watched his children play in the yard. A man who posted Bible verses on Facebook. A man who, just hours before committing the deadliest mass shooting in Louisiana history, was called a devoted father by people who thought they knew him. And by sunrise, 8 children were dead, shot in their sleep, most of them shot in the head. And only one child, one 12-year-old girl, made it out alive. Stay with me, because this story is more complicated and more painful than anything you have ever heard. And it is not over. Let's go back to Saturday afternoon, April 18th, 2026, in the Cedar Grove neighborhood of Shreveport, Louisiana. A neighbor named Freddie Montgomery was walking home after visiting a friend. He looked across the street and saw Shamar Elkins sitting on his front porch, 31 years old. Calm, ordinary. Children were running and laughing in the yard around him. Freddie waved. Shamar waved back. That was it. 2 neighbors acknowledging each other on a quiet Saturday. Nothing unusual. Nothing alarming. Freddie Montgomery went to bed that night not knowing that those children would never see another Monday morning. When Freddie opened his curtains Sunday morning, he saw police cars. Then more police cars. Then more. He walked outside and asked an officer if the scene was bad. The officer said yes. Freddie asked if there were fatalities. The officer said multiple. Freddie asked if those fatalities included children. The officer said multiple again. Multiple. Children. Dead. Across the street from where he slept. And that is how the Cedar Grove community woke up on April 19th, 2026, to a nightmare that would make Shreveport the center of the entire nation's grief. Now let's talk about who Shamar Elkins was. Because if you want to understand what happened inside that house on West 79th Street, you need to understand the man who did it. Shamar Elkins was born on December 7th, 1994. His mother, Mahalia Elkins, had him as a teenager and was battling a crack cocaine addiction. She gave him to a family friend named Betty Walker to raise. That detail matters. Not as an excuse, never as an excuse for what he did, but because it is part of understanding a man who grew up already knowing what it felt like to be left behind. Betty Walker raised him. She described him as someone she loved. She said just the weekend before the massacre, the whole family had come over to her home for dinner. She saw nothing, not a single warning sign, that this was coming. Elkins eventually reconnected with his biological mother in his mid-20s. He served in the Louisiana Army National Guard from 2013 to 2020 as a signal support system specialist and a fire support specialist. 7 years of service. He never deployed. He left as a private. He worked at UPS. He was on the surface the picture of a working-class man trying to hold his life together. But underneath, there were cracks that nobody fixed in time. Elkins had 2 women in his life and children with both of them. His ex-wife, Christina Snow, lived just 1 block away from the house he shared with his current wife. He had 3 children with Christina, and with his wife Shaniqua Pugh, a woman he had been together with for 10 years and married on April 9th, 2024, he had 4 more children. 7 children of his own scattered across 2 households on the same block. And he had access to both. That access would become the weapon before the weapon. Elkins and Shaniqua were not doing well. In fact, by April 2026, their marriage was falling apart at the seams. They were in the middle of a separation. They were due in divorce court on Monday, April 20th, the very morning after the massacre, to sign the papers. That date was not a coincidence. That date was a deadline. And Shamar Elkins was running out of time. His brother-in-law, Troy Brown, would later tell reporters that Elkins had told him over and over again, "Bro, I don't want to lose my wife." He said Elkins had been drowning, that he reached out, that people around him tried to help. Troy said he would ask Elkins to come outside and play dominoes, go for walks, just be around people. But Elkins would wave it off. He said he was fine. He said he would just deal with it. He was not fine. Let me tell you exactly how bad things had gotten in the weeks and months before April 19th. In February 2026, Elkins attempted to take his own life. That is not a rumor. That is confirmed. After that attempt, he sought help at a Veterans Affairs hospital. He checked himself in for a mental health evaluation and stayed. On April 5th, 2026, just 2 weeks before the massacre, Elkins called his mother and his stepfather Marcus Jackson. He sounded low. He sounded like someone who was already slipping away. He told Marcus he was drowning in dark thoughts. He said his wife wanted a divorce, and he did not know how to handle it. Marcus tried to encourage him. Marcus told him, "You can beat this. You can come back from this." And Shamar Elkins looked at his stepfather, emotionally if not physically, and said something that should have set off every alarm in the world. He said, "Some people don't come back from their demons. Some people don't come back from their demons." Marcus thought he was talking about himself. He was. But he was also telling everyone exactly what was coming. And the night before Easter Sunday, Elkins was also scrolling social media. There is a now viral screenshot of a Facebook post he responded to just weeks before the massacre. The post asked fathers if they could go back in time and have children with a different woman but still have the same kids. Would they do it? Shamar Elkins answered bluntly. He wrote, "Hell yeah, I would." And the day after, he posted a prayer to God asking for help guarding his mind and his emotions. A man conflicted. A man spiraling. A man who was leaving breadcrumbs everywhere and nobody picked them up in time. Now here is something that has not gotten enough attention. Betty Walker, the woman who raised Elkins, revealed something chilling. She said that back in 2023, when Shaniqua had considered leaving Elkins and taking the children with her, Elkins had a terrifying reaction. He told Shaniqua that if she tried to leave him and take those kids, he would kill her, the kids, and himself. 2023. 3 years before he actually did it. 3 years before 8 children lay dead in Shreveport, Shamar Elkins said those exact words. Kill her. Kill the kids. Kill himself. And then life moved on. They got married in 2024. They had more children together. And the threat was buried under the noise of everyday life. This is where things get serious. Because this was not a man who snapped. This was not some random act of violence that nobody could have seen coming. This was a man who made a threat, and nobody treated it with the urgency it deserved. A man who attempted suicide and was released back into the world after 11 days. A man who told his stepfather 2 weeks before the shooting that some people do not come back from their demons. Ask yourself right now, how many warning signs does it take? Let us walk through the morning of April 19th minute by minute, because the timeline is critical and it is heartbreaking. It began at approximately 5:55 in the morning, while Shreveport was still dark and quiet. Elkins went first to the home on Harrison Street, 1 block away from his wife's house, where his ex-wife Christina Snow lived. He knocked on her door, and when she answered, he shot her. 9 times. She was shot 9 times, and left critically wounded on the floor of her own home. But this woman, this remarkable wounded woman, used Siri to call 911. Lying on the floor of her home, bleeding from 9 bullet wounds, Christina Snow asked Siri to call for help. And then Elkins was gone. He had taken her 3 children and driven away into the dark. At approximately 6 o'clock in the morning, the first 911 call came in about the West 79th Street house. The caller was on the roof. She said someone was inside with a gun. She said people had been shot. Then came a second call saying that Elkins had shot everyone inside the house. Then a third call. Keosha Pugh, Shaniqua's sister, called a family member and said words that no human being should ever have to speak. She said, "He done shot the kids. He killed the kids." Police arrived on scene at 6:01 a.m. What they found inside that house is something that officers described as a disgusting and evil scene. 8 children. Shot. Many of them while they were still in bed. Most of them shot in the head. 5 girls and 3 boys. ranging in age from 3 years old to 11 years old. Asleep when it started, gone before sunrise. Their names were Jayla Elkins, age 3, Shayla Elkins, age 5, Kayla Pugh, age 6, Kadarian Snow, age 6, Layla Pugh, age 7, Markaden Pugh, age 10, Braylon Snow, age 5, and Soraya Snow, age 11. Say their names. Please say their names. 7 of them were Elkin's own biological children. One of them, little Markaden Pugh, was his nephew. His own nephew. A child who was in that house because it was family. Because families are supposed to be safe, but not everyone died. Shaniqua Pugh, Elkin's wife, and the mother of 4 of those children, was shot. She survived. She is expected to recover physically. What she will carry emotionally for the rest of her life is something we cannot even begin to measure. And then there was Keosha Pugh, Shaniqua's sister. She lived in that house too. And when she realized what was happening, when she heard the shots and understood the horror unfolding around her, she did something extraordinary. She grabbed her daughter, her 12-year-old daughter, and she climbed to the roof, in the dark, with a monster downstairs, with children dying around her. She climbed out onto the roof, and she jumped. Keosha broke bones in the fall. She was badly hurt, but she survived, and her 12-year-old daughter, the one she held onto, jumped from that roof and walked away with only scratches. Only scratches. In a house where 8 children were murdered. In a house where 2 women were shot. One 12-year-old girl jumped off the roof in the dark and survived with scratches. And that little girl is the reason we know the details of what happened inside that house. Her account, the account of a child who survived the unsurvivable, is central to what investigators now understand about the final moments of those 8 babies. Sit with that for a moment. Let that land. A 12-year-old girl survived a massacre, and she has to live with that for the rest of her life. She has to live with the screaming, with the dark, with the moment she made the decision to jump, with the faces of the children she left behind because she could not save them. She has to carry all of that, and she is 12 years old. After the West 79th Street house, Elkins fled. At approximately 6:15 a.m., he carjacked a vehicle at gunpoint near the intersection of Linwood Avenue and West 79th Street. And then he ran. He drove into the neighboring Bossier Parish about 15 miles away, with police in pursuit. At 6:29 a.m., police confronted him. Gunfire was exchanged, and Shamar Elkins was dead at the scene by 7:03 a.m. But here is a detail that has sparked debate and investigation. The initial reports said police shot and killed him. Then a preliminary autopsy came back and said something different. The autopsy indicated that Elkins died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. So which is it? Did police shoot him? Did he shoot himself? The Louisiana State Police are still investigating. The answer matters, not because it changes what he did, but because the truth always matters. And right now the truth is still unclear. What is clear is that Shamar Elkins was a convicted felon. He was banned from legally owning a firearm under Louisiana law. He absolutely should not have had that gun. So how did he get it? That is where the story keeps going. Within days of the massacre, federal investigators traced the weapon, a Mossberg rifle-style pistol, back through its ownership chain and landed on a 56-year-old man named Charles Ford. Ford is a convicted felon who was also legally prohibited from possessing a firearm. Investigators say Ford was in possession of the rifle before it ended up in Elkins' hands. When ATF agents first questioned Ford, he lied. He said he had never had the gun. Then when they pressed harder, he changed his story. He admitted he had kept it under the seat of his truck. And here is the part that makes your stomach turn. Ford said he suspected Elkins had taken the gun from his truck because Elkins was one of the few people who regularly rode with him. He said he noticed the gun was missing around March 9th, 6 weeks before the massacre. He confronted Elkins about it, and when Elkins got defensive and aggressive about it, Ford backed off. He let it go. Ford let it go. And 6 weeks later, 8 children were dead. Charles Ford now faces federal charges of being a felon in possession of a firearm and making false statements to federal agents. He faces up to 15 years in prison. And as the U.S. Attorney Zachary Keller said, Elkins' death means the community will never see him face justice. But holding the person who put that gun in his hands accountable is the least that can be done now. But wait, there is more. The house that Elkins fled to when he ran, the house in Bossier City where he died, belonged to a man named Michael Mayance, 54 years old. When police searched that home, they found multiple firearms inside. And when they ran a check on Mayance, they discovered he was under an active domestic violence protection order that had been in place since October 2024. He was legally prohibited from possessing firearms because of that order. The order was still in effect. He had multiple guns anyway. On April 23, Mayance was charged with illegally possessing a firearm while under a domestic violence injunction. He also faces up to 15 years in federal prison. So let me connect these dots for you. A convicted felon named Charles Ford had a gun. He let Shamar Elkins, another convicted felon, take it. Elkins used it to murder 8 children. Then Elkins fled to the home of yet another man with firearms he was not legally allowed to have, a man who was himself the subject of a domestic violence order. This case is not just about one man's breakdown. It is about a web of illegal guns and broken systems and failed safety nets that let 8 children die in their sleep. This changes everything about how we look at this case. The community reaction was immediate, and it was devastating. By Monday morning, a makeshift memorial had already grown on the lawn outside the West 79th Street home. Stuffed animals, balloons, flowers, photographs of little faces smiling in ways that made the grief heavier than words can carry. People came and went throughout the day, laying things down and crying and holding each other. Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry announced that his foundation Love One Louisiana would cover the funeral expenses for all 8 children. Governor Landry said publicly, "I couldn't place myself in the shoes of any father who could execute their children." The Community Foundation of North Louisiana set up 2 separate funds, one for the surviving family members and one specifically dedicated to domestic violence protection work in the region. A prayer vigil was held on April 20th. The city gathered, and the grief was the kind that sits heavy in your chest and does not move for a long time. The funerals for all 8 children are scheduled together for May 9th at Summer Grove Baptist Church. All 8 babies will be buried near each other. Because even in death, they are not being separated. Shreveport Mayor Tom Arsenault called it maybe the worst tragic situation the city had ever faced. The police chief Wayne Smith said at his press conference that his heart could not begin to imagine how such an event could occur. And Congressman Maxwell Frost said on social media that 8 children in Louisiana losing their lives was a devastating reminder that children and teens continue to be failed every single day. Seto Parish Public Schools Superintendent Keith Burton called on the entire community to come together to take care of its children and families. To carry the weight together. The weight. Because that is exactly what this is. A weight that an entire city, an entire nation, did not ask to carry. But has to. Now let me ask you something that I have been sitting with since this story broke. Elkins posted a prayer on Facebook the day after Easter asking God to help him guard his mind and his emotions. Just 10 days before the massacre. He told his stepfather some people do not come back from their demons. He attempted suicide in February. He was released from a VA hospital after 11 days. He had threatened to kill his wife, his children, and himself in 2023. He had a prior illegal weapons conviction. He was in the middle of divorce proceedings. Every single one of those things is a data point, and not one of them stopped what happened. So now the question is not just who did this. The question is how many different places did the system fail these 8 children? How many doors were open that should have been closed? How many calls were not made? How many people stepped back when they should have stepped forward? I am not blaming anyone except Shamar Elkins for what Shamar Elkins did. He made that choice. He pulled that trigger 8 times on children who trusted him to protect them. That responsibility belongs entirely to him. But the conversation about what could have been prevented, that conversation has to happen. For Jayla, for Shayla, for Kayla, for Layla, for Markaden, for Kadarian, for Braylon, for Soraya. They deserve that conversation to happen. And let us talk about Christina Snow for a moment, because she does not get enough attention in this story. This woman was shot 9 times. 9 times. And she used Siri to call 911. She is a survivor in the most literal and powerful sense of that word. She was shot 9 times and she still fought. She still reached for help. She is recovering from those wounds right now. She lost people she loved. Her children were taken from the scene by Elkins. And she is still here. If you are watching this right now, I want you to drop a heart in the comments for Christina Snow. Because she is one of the bravest people in this entire story, and the world needs to say her name too. And what about Shaniqua, the wife who went to that divorce court date without him on Monday morning because there was no more him? Because by 7:03 a.m. Sunday it was already too late for court dates and divorce papers and second chances. She had 4 children with this man. 4. And now she has to rebuild a life from the rubble of everything she believed that life would be. What does that grief even look like? What words exist for that kind of loss? I do not think they do. Let me bring it back to the 12-year-old girl one more time. Because she is the center of this story in a way that is hard to articulate but impossible to ignore. She jumped off a roof in the dark. With her mother. In the middle of a massacre. She hit the ground. She got up. She had scratches. Just scratches. Her uncle Troy Brown spoke to the media. He tried to hold himself together. He talked about losing 8 children he loved like his own. He said he would never get to throw a football with his son again. His son was Marcaden Pugh, 10 years old, gone. And through the tears Troy Brown confirmed his daughter, the 12-year-old who jumped from the roof, had come away with just some scratches. Scratches. In a family that lost 8 of its children, one little girl has scratches. And she carries inside of her a weight that is heavier than any injury. She was there. She heard it. She felt it. She chose to jump instead of stay. And she is going to have to figure out how to live with all of that. If you are a parent watching this right now, hug your children tonight. I mean it. Hug them a little longer. Because there are parents in Shreveport, Louisiana, who would give anything for one more second with their babies. Comment below and tell me, what is the one thing from this story that hit you the hardest? Because I know for me, it is the image of that little girl on the roof in the dark. I cannot shake it. Here is where things stand right now as of the latest updates. The 8 children's deaths, more than double the number of homicides recorded in Shreveport and Caddo Parish for all of 2026. That is how catastrophic the single morning was. The Louisiana State Police are still investigating the exact circumstances of Shamar Elkins' death to determine whether he was killed by officers or died by suicide. Charles Ford is federally charged and facing up to 15 years for the gun connection. Michael Mayence is federally charged and facing up to 15 years for his own illegal weapons possession. The ATF and FBI are still investigating how Elkins obtained the weapon and whether there are any further accountability gaps. Christina Snow is recovering. Shaniqua Pugh is recovering. Keosha Pugh and her 12-year-old daughter are recovering. And 8 children are being laid to rest on May 9th at Summer Grove Baptist Church. This case is not